Shalom, everyone. The name for a Jew in Hebrew is Yehudi. The first person in the Tanakh, in the Bible, to be called a Jew is Mordechai in the story of Purim. He's called Mordechai ha-Yehudi. The word Yehudi comes from the word Yehuda, the fourth son born to Leah and Yaakov, was called Yehuda. And the root of Yehuda is hod, to give thanks, to praise, to acknowledge. Because Leah said, now that I have a fourth son, now she just praises God. She's so thankful. And so Yehuda is the root of the word Yehudi. And the reason that the first person who's called a Yehudi is Mordechai is in Persia. This is after the second temple was destroyed and the Jews were taken into exile. Before the temple was destroyed, approximately 200 years before the second temple was destroyed, the Assyrians took away 10 of the tribes into exile, never to be heard of again, even though there are remnants of the 10 tribes quite literally around the world. But those 10 tribes disappeared from the land of Israel, and it's not easy to identify exactly where they went. So after that happened, the two main tribes that were left in the southern kingdom were Benjamin and Yehuda. But Yehuda was by far the main tribe. So when they were taken into exile, the name Yehudi became the identification of the people of Israel, because that was the main tribe that was left. Of course, there were Kohanim and Leviim, priests and Levites, and there was a smattering of all the other tribes that were in the southern kingdom when we were taken away. One of the most important things that we could see of the word Yehudi or Yehuda is that it's actually made up of the 4 letters of God's most essential name, a Yud and a He and a Vav and a He. Yehuda is Yud, He, Vav, Daled, He. So it's the 4 letters of God's name, but there's a Daled in the name. So what we learn from this is that the role of a Jew in the world is as God's representative. We are the witnesses of God's existence and oneness, and his role in all of history. And this is such an important understanding for every individual Jew to represent the name of God in the world. And that's why when a Jew doesn't act accordingly or as they should, this is considered a desecration of God's name, because we carry God's name in our very definition of being a Yehudi. Now, we're going to see something very interesting here, that the 4 letters of God's name that are 4 of the 5 letters of Yehuda or Yehudi is the idea that the 4 letters of God's name, and here we're speaking specifically of Yehuda, because Yehudi ends with a Yud, so it doesn't have that second He as in God's name. But again, the name Yehudi comes from Yehuda. And of course, all the kings came from Yehuda, and Mashiach, the ultimate Redeemer, also comes from Yehuda. But if we look at the numerical values of the names of the patriarchs, we see that all of them had the factor of 26, meaning that their Gematria was a multiple of 26. So let's just start with Yitzchak. The numerical value of Yitzchak is 208, which is 8 times 26. 26, again, is the numerical value of the 4-letter essential name of God. His son Yaakov, his numerical value is 182, which is 7 times 26. Yaakov's main son was Yosef. As it says in the Torah, these are the generations of Yaakov, Yosef. So we see that he was the one that Yaakov, for better or for worse, favored, and was the essential son of Yaakov. So his numerical value, Yosef, is 156, which is 6 times 26. So here we see Yitzchak is 8 times 26, Yaakov is 7 times 26, Yosef is 6 times 26. So then we'll ask, well, what about Avram? Avram's Gematria is 248, which is not a multiple of 26. But what it is a multiple of is not a multiple of, but it equals the phrase, the very important phrase, B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. That the same Gematria of Avram equals the phrase in the image of God. And we see this in the second telling of the creation story, where after the first telling of the 6 days of creation and the first Shabbat, the Torah goes back and starts to fill in some of the information, especially about the creation of human beings, what happened in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and as the story progresses. And that begins, Ve'ela toldot Shemayim va'aretz behi baram. These are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation. Behi baram. And the sages point out, if you look at the word behi baram, it's the same letters as be'avraham. When you permute the letters of behi baram, it equals be'avraham. So you could read it, these are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation through the energy of Avraham. And there's an expression by the sages about all the patriarchs, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, hen Merkava. They are the chariots of God. So here already we said that we are the representatives of God. That Yehuda, Yehudi, the word Jew means to be a representative of God because the letters of God's name are included in our self-definition. So it's so important to see ourselves that way, that many times it's a blessing and maybe a bit of a curse, this idea that the whole world holds Israel to a different standard. There's something very good about that the world expects and acknowledges that there is something special about the Jewish people, but when we don't act the way we're supposed to be, then we have this double standard that we're held to, that we're expected to be deeper, higher, more moral, higher values. And if we don't do that, then it becomes a desecration of God's name. So here, Abraham, he doesn't have the factors or the letters of God's name in his Gematria, But he has the idea of B'Tselem Elokim, that all of humanity is in a certain way coming from Avram. The whole creation is coming from the aspect of Avram. Avram represents Chesed. And we have a verse, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that God builds his world on Chesed. And that's why it says these are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation. They are created in the aspect of Avram, in Chesed, in Tselem Elokim. So may we keep this idea very fresh in our minds and know whatever a Jew does in this world, we are being judged by a higher standard. When we live up to that higher standard, it is a sanctification of God's name. But if we don't, God forbid, then it becomes a desecration of God's name. So we should all keep that in mind, and we should only sanctify God's name in this world.